lecturer, Dr. Leslie Pollard, is here. He's an Evans native, and he's very familiar with Payne College. He's a graduate of Payne College. He taught there for 30 years. He was the Social Studies Department chair. He's taught African American histories and American histories there, and he was also the Callaway Professor of History in 1994. Now he is retired and he's writing books, one of which we have here today, Segregated Doctoring. It's all about the Black physicians in Augusta from 1902 to 1952, and we're just very excited to have him here. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Leslie Pollard.
Good afternoon. It is afternoon.
That's right.
I want to thank Crystal for that kind introduction. I don't know why I think I can do this without my glasses. I would like to thank Director Glazer and Crystal for my being here. I see my good friend Dr. Caldwell is over there. Leanne was one of the first people I met when I came back from Syracuse back in, I hope she doesn't mind my saying this because it dates her, back in 1978. And since that time, she's been one of my very good friends. Mm-hmm. So that was over 40 years, so that's a long time. Longer than marriages last. Anyway, my comments on Black physicians don't seem to fit seamlessly into the theme for this lecture series. The other presentations focus on manuscripts, genealogy, documentaries, oral history, newspapers, and literature as they relate to the collection of historical material. To address this theme, I will comment briefly on how these sources were used to research segregated doctrine. The book covers the period from 1902 to 1952 with the mandated historical background before 1902 and a trajectory of events after 1952. Secondary sources, published and unpublished, were used for context and perspective, and to develop strategies and questions for examining other sources. I examined every document I could find related to Augusta's Black medical history, including master's theses, doctoral dissertations, and Payne College catalogs, bulletins, and senior field papers. I examined Haynes alumni records, minutes of Black medical societies, Pilgrim Insurance Company records from the 1930s, and Mays mortuary records from 1922 to 1955. I used doctors' biographies, obituaries, cemetery records. By that I mean the information I found on tombstones, pictures, letters, and I used doctors' wills. I interviewed 20 people whom I believe had some personal knowledge about Black physicians. 4 of them, 3 Black and 1 white, were physicians from that era. I also interviewed doctors' wives, their children, several nurses, and many educators. In addition, I interviewed the in-house historians at MCG and University Hospital, and I used oral history collected by other individuals. A physician's search of the Augusta Chronicle will lead one to the Black section of the paper, entitled Notes on the Colored People, and sometimes other titles, particularly after the death of the editor Silas Floyd in 1923. I read all the copies of the Georgia Baptist newspaper, which are on microfilm at Augusta University. I read the relevant sections of the Augusta News Review, the Black Focus, and the Metro Courier. I located 2 copies of the Echo from the 1920s, but unfortunately, I found no copies of the Weekly Review. I went through the appropriate sections of the city directories from 1890 to 1960. I found that there were 16 of them that were missing. I read MCG faculty minutes from 1880 to 1927. I spent a great deal of time going through the city council minutes from 1890 to 1960. They not only contain the minutes, but the mayor's annual reports, city ordinances, committee reports, and departmental reports, police, fire, and health departments. Apart from these are city council yearbooks and separate compilations of city ordinances. Anyone interested in a more detailed understanding of my sources and collection methods should read the 383 endnotes. Time constraints require that I omit the usual historical background in my presentation. Suffice it to say, when the earliest Black physicians arrived in Augusta in the late 1870s and 1880s, there was some flexibility in race relations. But by the end of the first decade of the 20th century, the infrastructure of legal segregation was fully implemented. In addition, Black Southerners were expected to observe a strict standard of racial etiquette in every encounter with a white person. Segregation in medicine essentially followed the same pattern as the rest of society. The first Black physician in Augusta was Dr. Alonzo McLennan, who came to Augusta around 1879. The second Black physician was Dr. George Davis, who came around 1880, and the third was Dr. E.H. Meyer, but neither one remained in Augusta. The first Black physician to spend his entire professional career in Augusta was Dr. George Nelson Stoney, who came in 1889. He was a graduate of Howard University and the Chicago Medical School. He was the most respected and influential Black physician of his era. The first female physician, Dr. Alice Woodby, arrived in Augusta in 1892, but left the next year after marrying Savannah physician, Dr. Cornelius McCain. Beginning in the 1890s, the number of African-American physicians dramatically increased. Joining Dr. Stoney were Drs. George Burroughs, M.N. White, Lexius Harper, Adolphus Gordon, William Pritchett, Robert C. Williams, H.D. Spaulding, I.C. Durham, Daniel W. Cope, and William Pritchett. Two more women physicians came to Augusta during this period. Dr. Luella Sams, the sister of Dr. S.S. Johnson, and Dr. Georgiana Dwelly, the daughter of Springfield pastor George Dwelly. But neither one remained after 1909. There was no Black female physician in Augusta until 1950, and no Black female dentist at any time between 1902 and 1952. Augusta has a unique medical history due primarily to the presence of the Medical College of Georgia, or what we commonly refer to as MCG. In 1818, Augusta founded City Hospital, located on Green Street, for indigent whites who could not afford home visits by private physicians. In 1869, the hospital moved into larger quarters on Walker and Washington Streets at the rear of MCG, which was at that time located on Telfair Street. City Hospital served white citizens until University Hospital was completed in 1915. I might add that the university operated its own ambulance for white emergency patients, but Black emergency patients were transported by funeral homes. By the 1950s, both races were transported by funeral homes. When most southern cities relegated Black patients to basements and back rooms of white hospitals, Augusta operated a separate hospital for African Americans. In 1867, the Freedmen's Bureau started the first hospital, which was turned over to the city in 1868 after federal troops withdrew from the area. In 1871, Augusta built a new Freedmen's Hospital, and in April 1895, it was replaced by the Lamar Hospital, located at Gwinnett and Harrison Street. The Chinese who were brought here in the 1870s to help expand the Augusta Canal were treated at both the black and white hospitals. In 1904, when one of them sought admission to the white hospital, city officials faced a dilemma, but decided that the Chinese may be treated at either facility. Most likely, segregation laws forced the Chinese to identify more closely with the privileged group. Faulty wiring in the nurses' quarters caused Lamar Hospital to burn in 1911, which was a blessing in disguise for the black community. The city council had decided to build a new city hospital, but it now faced the prospect of building two hospitals. Jim Crow laws forbade the races from sharing the same facility, but there were no laws preventing them from sharing the same location. The city constructed University Hospital on Gwinnett and Harper Streets across from MCG. It had an administrative building flanked on one side with the Barrett wing for whites and on the other side with the Lamar wings for blacks. University Hospital served the entire community for the remainder of the segregation period. All the hospitals were teaching facilities for MCG, based on contracts with the city council and overseen by a hospital committee composed of MCG faculty and city officials. The medical college was in charge of both the medical and administrative components of City Hospital, but for unknown reasons, the administration of Lamar Hospital remained with the city council. Under this arrangement, African American physicians were allowed to treat their patients in the black hospitals alongside physicians from MCG. In January 1892, Mayor James Alexander appointed a black physician, Dr. Daniel Coe, superintendent of the Freedmen's Hospital. MCG faculty and students were outraged, and the faculty voted to discontinue their duties at the hospital, but Mayor Alexander refused to fire Dr. Coe. In June, MCG faculty reported to the city council that Dr. Coe, and I quote, had proven incompetent, obstructive, and insolent, finally having to be knocked down by the staff surgeon, Dr. L.L. Spence, end of quote. There's no record of how Dr. Coe reacted to his assault, but fearing for the safety of his family, he resigned the position in August. Doctors George Stoney, H.D. Spalding, and James Collier, sometimes referred to as stewards, replaced Dr. Coe until 1901, when Mary Corley, a graduate of Lamar Nursing Program, was appointed director of Lamar Hospital. In 1905, she was replaced by Claudia Fishburne, a white nurse, and black nurses threatened to resign, but failed to do so. By that time, no black person was expected to hold any position that appeared to have authority over a white person. Augusta hired city physicians to care for the poor who were unable to come to the hospital and could not afford treatment in their homes. In 1896, the city council agreed to hire a black and a woman city physician. They were selected in January 1868 and were to be re-elected at 3-year intervals. The woman physician, Dr. Sophie Davis, was expected to see both black and white women. The black physician, Dr. William Pritchard, was expected to treat men, women, and children, but to confine his services to his own race. Now, this restriction was never enacted into law in Augusta, but racial etiquette prevented black physicians from treating white females. Despite their immense popularity and petitions from over 600 white women and dozens of prominent African Americans, the city council decided in 1901 not to renew the contracts of the city physicians. City councilmen created 3 new medical districts and elected 3 white male physicians. In 1897, there was still some wiggle room in race relations in Augusta, but by 1901, the climate had changed, and the intersection of gender and race was on full display in the evolution of segregated doctrine. I might add that the city no longer used black physicians to care for patients on chain gangs in jails or the stockades, and they were not used anymore to evaluate claims of injuries citizens brought against the city. In 1911, the duties of city physicians were turned over to MCG. In 1902, the City Council and the Medical College negotiated a new contract, which was a major turning point in Black Augusta's medical history. The City Council agreed to turn over, and I quote, the entire and exclusive management, control, and directions of the two hospitals in Augusta to the faculty of MCG. With both hospitals administered by the Medical College, Black physicians were denied privileges at Lamar Hospital, and their patients had to be turned over to white doctors. This requirement transformed the Black hospital into a hospital for African American patients. This is not a distinction without a difference. First, Black physicians could no longer perform operations, acquire clinical experience, observe a variety of diseases, and consult with each other in a hospital setting. Second, Black physicians who served 2/3 of the African American population could not follow their patients to the hospital, even though MCG allowed autopsies on patients who died in the wards without private physicians. In 1911, some members of City Council attempted to remove Black nurses, but the attempt failed. How they expected to run an African-American hospital without Black nurses under existing segregation laws is still a mystery to me. Black physicians responded to their removal from Lamar with their own hospitals and clinics to treat patients and perform surgery. The most immediate and substantial response to their exclusion was the establishment of Burroughs Hospital in 1902 on the southwest corner of 9th and Gwinnett Street by Dr. George Burroughs. The Burroughs building was 3 stories with a ward and 27 rooms with appropriate equipment. On the first floor was the drugstore, a post office, a reception room, and offices for Dr. Burroughs and his full-time assistant, Dr. Alexius Harper. On the second and third floors, the hospital had an operating room equipped with instruments and tables, a 2-wheel stretcher, a microscope, and a room with a state-of-the-art x-ray machine. It also had an amphitheater for observing surgical procedures. There were 7 other Black physicians who were part of the regular Burroughs staff. It also had 2 full-time nurses, 5 part-time nurses, and several orderlies. Dr. Burroughs' wife, Janie Walton Burroughs, was considered the hospital administrator. Unfortunately, Dr. Burroughs died of blood poisoning in 1919, and efforts to continue the hospital failed. In 1925, Dr. A.B. Johnson opened Bruce Hospital on 8th Street. Black physicians were also denied membership in the American Medical Association, the Richmond County Medical Society, and the Medical Association of Georgia. Their exclusion from the clinics of the major medical associations constrained African American doctors' ability to stay abreast of their field and contributed to the perception on both sides of the color line that they were less qualified than their white counterparts. Black doctors formed their own organizations for mutual support and continuing education. In 1891, Black Augusta physicians, dentists, and pharmacists formed the Doctors Club, which evolved into the Stony Medical and Dental Association. At a meeting in Augusta in 1893, they helped to organize the Georgia State Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Association. In 1895, 12 Black doctors gathered at the First Congregational Church in Atlanta to form the National Medical Association. The NMA became the chief advocacy group for Black doctors, and its journal, founded in 1909, was the major source of information related to their profession. Denied admission to Southern medical schools, Black and white supporters founded 14 medical schools by 1915. But by 1925, all of them had closed except Meharry Medical School and Howard Medical School. Now, in my interview with Dr. Marion Johnson, he said that when he graduated from college, his father, Dr. Scipio Johnson, arranged a meeting with Dr. G. Lombard Kelly, who was the dean at MCG. And the reason for the meeting, he wanted to get his son in the MCG. Now, Dr. Kelly responded that the time is not right, but he offered some hope by saying the time will come. Now, when Edith May Irby was accepted to the University of Arkansas Medical School in 1947, she was the first African-American student admitted to a Southern medical college. MCG graduated its first female student in 1926 and its first black students in 1971. In 1947, Southern governors, including Herman Talmadge, entered into an agreement with Meharry Medical School to allow black students from their states to attend the institution with state funds. Meharry was paid $1,500 for each medical student and $750 for each nurse, an arrangement that earned Meharry over $300,000 a year. Critics accused Meharry of allowing Southern states to stave off desegregation. Historian Donald Grant estimated that Georgia, between 1943 and 1970, spent more than $4 million on out-of-state tuition to graduate and medical schools for African-American students. Between 1902 and 1952, there were at least 31 black physicians and 10 dentists who practiced in Augusta, but only 6 remained in 1950. The closing of black medical schools restricted the supply of black medical personnel across the nation. Between 1933 and 1950, Augusta attracted only 3 new physicians, all native Augustans. Dr. Lavert Jones came in 1933, but unfortunately passed away in 1939. Dr. Marion Johnson, whom I just mentioned when I was talking about Dr. Scipio S. Johnson's son. Dr. Marion Johnson, the son of Dr. Scipio Johnson, began practice in 1946, but soon left for Los Angeles. And Dr. Robertine Josie Ford, the daughter of Dr. T.W. Josie, came in 1950. Ford moved to Washington, D.C. 2 years later, but she distinguished herself as the first black female physician in Augusta to have privileges at the University Hospital. She was also the first black female physician since 1909. Dr. Paul Weston began practice in 1952 and was the first to have surgical privileges at the University Hospital. Weston had a long career in Augusta and marked the transition from segregated medicine in Augusta to a unitary system of healthcare. Let me conclude with a composite of the black Augusta physician. The physician was a male who graduated primarily from Meharry and Howard medical schools. He set up practice immediately after completing medical school and passing the medical exam required in Georgia in 1896. But by the 1930s, he completed an internship at a place such as Homer Phillips Hospital in St. Louis. If he arrived prior to 1902, he had access to the black public hospital. His first office was in his home, and if he came to Augusta at the beginning of the century, he might have had an office on Reynolds, Broad, or Telfair Street. As segregation became more entrenched, he moved to the black community to establish an office at Gwinnett, 9th, 11th, or 12th Streets, where he built a home that reflected his economic status. He spent little time treating office patients because most of the day was spent visiting patients in their homes. His first mode of transportation was the horse and buggy, but by the 1920s, he drove an automobile. He was denied membership in white medical societies, but joined with other black physicians and dentists to establish medical associations, hospitals, and clinics. He cooperated with his colleagues But unlike today, he formed no formal partnerships or groups. For continuing education, he depended on the clinics and courses at the Medical Association or his alma mater, but primarily at the John A. Andrews Hospital in Tuskegee. Politically, he was a Republican who helped to keep their party alive during the Jim Crow era. He considered himself a race man and embraced the tradition of healing the sick and serving the community in which he was economically, socially, and emotionally tied. He was a churchgoer who held a position as a trustee or deacon. His denomination was Baptist, but his religious association reflected his family background rather than his social status. He was a member of a fraternity, most likely an Omega or Alpha. He was a family man whose wife, perhaps a nurse or teacher, not only shared his commitment to community service, but also supported causes that reflected her independence. Black physicians derived their living from an impoverished population and supplemented their income by becoming medical examiners for benevolent associations, fraternal societies, and insurance companies. He was a businessman who most often owned a drugstore, but invested in real estate and other enterprises. He was the most respected man in the community, more esteemed than a minister, more respected than a school teacher, and more respected than the businessman. He was not flawless, but he valued his social status and jealously guarded his image. Thank you.
Is all this in your book?
Yeah.
I've had a chance to skim it, but I'm gonna read it.
Yeah, everything I said was pretty much in the book. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And you may have said this and I missed it. How long did it take for you to research? Because you had this list of things you found information in. And how did you find all of those things to research in?
Well, when I started working on this book, it was, I don't know, when in the end,
Years ago.
I was working at the time. I was teaching and chairing a division of social science, but so it took me a long time. If I said 12 years or so, I wouldn't be exaggerating.
How did you find all your research places to do research, I guess? The information, did one lead to you to the next, or
That's
did you
generally
just
what happens.
throw it out there and look for it?
Right. Well, that's generally what happens. When you interview people, you'll be surprised. Maybe you won't be surprised, but I was surprised to learn about resources that I had never thought about. And when you go to the Chronicles notes on colored people, that will lead you in many directions as to what documents that exist. And when I interviewed people like Dr. Walker and Dr. Marion Johnson, I interviewed the sons of Dr. S.S. Johnson. When you interview those people, you find a great deal of leads to other information.
Was there a nursing school also in Augusta? And what time frame was that?
The nursing school?
For African Americans?
The first nursing school was supposed to be the first nursing school in the Southeast, a black nursing school, was the Lamar Nursing School, which started in 1895.
Lucy Lane.
Yeah, Lucy Lane started it. As a matter of fact, there's some suggestion that Dr. Alex Woodby, who came in 1892, that that Lucy Lane had recruited her to be part of that nursing program. But you know, she married Cornelius McCain in Savannah, and she went to Savannah. They started at a very early nursing school and founded Charity Hospital. She's a very significant character if you follow her beyond Augusta. As a matter of fact, she and her husband Cornelius McCain founded the first hospital in Liberia.
Oh, really?
Oh my gosh.
Which was very interesting.
What made you interested in this topic? Is this
Well, I wrote a book on the black elderly, that was published in 1994. And I was familiar with a lot of the secondary sources on blacks in medicine as a result of that book. But the United Negro College Fund was giving minor, what do you call it, promotions of scholarship to black colleges. And they had money from the McVeigh Foundation. And they were looking for people to they were trying to increase research at black colleges. And somehow I came up on this topic, and I started to work on healthcare among blacks. And when I wrote the proposal, it was from 1910 to 1920. And that first paper that I wrote kind of got me started on this.
And you should add, your son became a physician.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had that discussion with the young man back there. He told me he was his doctor.
Oh.
Yeah. Matter of fact, he came because he thought I was my son.
And when I saw him, I thought, he looks older. I said, oh, that's not my buddy.
He looks older because he is.
I will see him next 2 weeks from now.
Any other questions? That gentleman in the
Yeah.
back. Yeah, go right ahead.
I was just overwhelmed by the thought that there was a tiny percentage of the hurt black people that got any care. The ones that needed care must not have gotten much care at all. With just a few black doctors and nurses, and then the Jim Crow stuff that wouldn't let anybody else deal with them. So I assume that those that did get care must have been special, and so many didn't.
Well, there's some truth to that, but white doctors treated black patients under segregated circumstances. About a third of when I looked at Pilgrim insurance records from the 1930s, I found that about a third of these individuals with policies named white physicians, and 2/3 named black physicians.
Okay.
So Jim Crow didn't prevent them from going to a white physician.
Okay.
I have a quick question. When you were talking about the group that was trying to get rid of the black nurses during that one time period, what was their reasoning for wanting to not have black nurses at Lamar?
I have no idea. It was at a time when they had expelled black doctors.
Okay.
They had just built University Hospital, and University Hospital was always in conflict with the city council.
Oh, okay.
So I have no idea why they wanted to do that. I really have no idea how they expected to run the hospital.
Right.
Unless they were gonna find white male nurses, and I don't think they won't be able to do that to run the hospital.
That's the interesting thing, is how gender intersects with race.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
white nurses would not have been allowed to take care of black men.
Oh, my goodness.
So I don't know how they would have run the hospital if they had.
Right.
Dr. Pollard, you said the first black admissions to the medical college were in like the 70s?
The first black one
Admissions.
Admissions.
to MCG.
Yeah.
Well, it was 1967, but the first graduates were 1971.
So between 52 and then, did you still see a dearth of black physicians in Augusta?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Did I see a what?
The lack of.
A black physician?
Yes.
Oh yeah, there was a time when there were about 16, 17 black physicians in Augusta. In 1950, there was just 6.
Oh.
And the reason for that, there are 2 reasons. One is because they closed the black medical schools. But another reason was that the physicians died out. You know, Dr. Dr. George Peterson, Dr. Stoney died in 1926, Dr. R.C. Williams died in 1939, Dr. LaGray Jones died in 1939, Dr. Scipio Johnson died in 1940. I mean, death combined with the fact that they were not attracting new physicians was the reason why they had only 6 in 1950. White physicians, the ratio of white physicians to the population in 1940 in Augusta was something like 1 in 40. But the ratio of black physicians to the black population was more like 1 in 3,000.
Wow.
I grew up in the Laney Walker corridor. I mean, I was born in 53, but I was only aware of along the corridor of one black physician. I'm sure, I know there were more, but just, you know, that was a busy corridor.
In 53, there was, well, what would it? There would still be about 6. Dr. Outlook was still alive. He died in 55. Dr. Joseph came in 50, but she left in 52. Now she came back, married to Dr. Griffin in 1956. Who else was there in 19? I can't think of the names, but you can find them.
Yeah, the books are available if you guys want them. He brought some extras.
Now,
Yes, sir.
we can buy them here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do we have them in the bookstore?
No, but I could talk to Dr. Pollard about that possibility.
All right, thank you.
They're cheaper here today though than they are on Amazon, so they're $25 here
It's the
today.
best kind of place to get them right now.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Oh.
Dr. Pollard, thank you so very much.